What's up, everybody? Hey, welcome to the channel. My name is Antoine Malone, and it's been a long time since I've really decided to do something on this YouTube channel, but we are back and starting out with a bang, starting out with Sean McDowell and Voddie Baucham talking about critical race theory and its compatibility with Christianity. I can't wait to get into the video. As you know, some of you may know, let me tell you a little bit. So I am a young adult pastor in the North Texas area, but I also work with an organization called Threaded, which is a gospel-based racial reconciliation organization. Our goal is very simple. I like to articulate it this way. We like to bring the gospel to racial conversation, racial conflict, and we think that the gospel is the best answer to overcome the conflict that we find there. So we think we can do that. So I'm obviously very interested in what Voddie Baucham's talking about with critical race theory. I've read his book, Fault Lines, and then Sean McDowell, of course, is always putting out good content and trying to figure out, some of the best ways to talk about Christian ideas. And so I thought to kick off this brand new series of videos, we would start with these two guys. Now, real quick, before we get into the video, I want you guys to weigh in on something for me. So I want you to do this in the comment section. So I am thinking about calling this series of videos, if you will, this sort of series of should I say series of videos, this segment on the channel, this is what I'm thinking about calling it. Sometimes I think out loud. And you'll probably get more to it. But if you like the sound of that, let me know. Or tell me, hey, man, I don't really like the way that sounds. And then we'll scrap it. But I'd love to get you guys' opinion on it. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the channel, and then we'll jump into the video. The first thing you need to know about this channel, again, it's brand new. Well, the channel's not brand new, but we're starting it, we're restarting it. So it's new in that way. And here's what we want to do. We want to develop a community who are willing to talk about and think through and discuss things from a Christian point of view, things that we may even disagree on. And listen, I crave a place where I can go and think out loud, right? To think and ponder about things that we are working through in the culture and ideas in scripture. But we can kind of do that and even disagree with each other without necessarily biting each other's head off and all that. So that is really hard to find on the internet. Like, everybody likes to be very aggressive and all this kind of business. So we want to build a community where we don't have that. And so if you're interested in being a part of that community, then I just want you to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because we're looking for probably not a huge community, but a community who will come in and share those sort of values, that we're going to be Christian, we're going to be authentic, we're going to think well, we're going to maybe even disagree well, but we're not going to attack and disrespect and demean each other. We're going to have that conversation. We're going to grow together. So that's what we're building here on this channel, on this Antoine Malone channel, and I hope you're a part of it. Again, we're going to kick it off with Sean McDowell and Voddie Baucham on critical race theory. This video is 59 minutes and 54 seconds, this interview that they're doing. So we're going to try to break this thing up and do it, about 30 minutes at a time. We're going to do a 30-minute sort of reaction at a time. And so I think we may get 4 or 5 videos out of this. Okay. All that being said, let's jump in.
Politically, it's discussed in the church. And although there's been plenty of discussions about what does it mean, should the church embrace it or not, my guest today, Voddie Baucham, author, speaker, leader, we're going to go a little bit of a different direction. We're going to kind of just talk about how should Christians approach this? Can we find unity across differences with critical race theory? Is it dividing the church? Why is it dividing the church? That's kind of the direction that we are going to head. Now,
All right, so that's a good spot, man. So it's a good question. Critical race theory is huge right now. Everybody's talking about it. Some people who don't know what they're talking about is talking about it. Others who have studied it well are talking about it. People are kind of all over the place. And it's not just in the church. It's politics. It's in the schools, in the education. Critical race theory is a buzzword now. So it's the fundamental question of this interview is, how compatible is critical race theory with Christianity? If you know anything about Voddie Baucham, you know that his position is typically that it has zero compatibility. And so it'll be interesting what he says here.
Now, those of you who watch this know I bring in a lot of different guests on my channel from a range of different perspectives. And sometimes people have criticized me for doing that. I understand the concern, but I want to hear from a number of different people and just piece together what's a wise Christian response to this. And Voddie Baucham, you are not immune to criticism. I think you have a statement in your book where you said about one of your kids that you have kind of a dad who's a lightning rod sometimes, so you have not avoided controversy. You've waded into these issues with your recent book called Fault Lines, which has sold a ton of copies, obviously stirred up a bunch of people, which I'm thrilled for you in that regard. But first off, we're glad that you're healthy and doing better. And thanks so much for coming on the show.
Okay, so before Voddie gets going, can we just give a shout out to Sean McDowell for the J's that he has in the back? I think those are some J's. You see those Nikes over there next to Wilson? I think those are the classic J's. We might have to call Sean McDowell to see where's the other shoe at. Like, what's he doing with these J's? That's the first thing. And of course, I see Spider-Man in the background. I know I should probably be looking at the background, but I had to say something about the J's. All right.
Oh man, you're very welcome, and I appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to this. As we talked about earlier, I think it's been about a dozen years since we've seen each other, so I'm just excited to sit and talk with you again.
It is. I remember you were there with your son, and we got to chat a little bit. So this is great. Thanks for doing it. Well, let's dive in. You tell a lot in your story in the book, and I think you're careful to not say, because of your race, because of your story, you have unique authority in this area. But clearly your perspectives are deeply informed by your background, as are mine. So I'd love to hear just your story of coming to faith.
Yeah. And you know what? I did that in the book for some specific reasons, not because I'm agreeing with the sort of CRT idea that, Black people have a special access to knowledge on race by virtue of our Blackness, but because there are individuals who have either thought that because I'm serving in Zambia, that I must be Zambian, which is kind of racist, actually, right? If a white person goes as a missionary to an African country, we don't assume that their ancestors, came from that country. But when a Black person goes to be a missionary in an African country, they must be going back to their homeland.
Interesting.
Right? So that was number one.
Okay. Yeah, that is right. That was number one. Okay. So shots fired already. Okay. So first critical race theory idea that he kind of touches on, they touch it and they keep moving, is this idea that because you're Black, you have some special authority on the concept or the conversation of race. This is, again, on this video, I'm probably going to do a little myth busting, and then I'm going to agree. I actually agree with Voddie on a lot of things. This, however, is not one of them. Critical race theory does not say that, or does not portend that because someone has Black skin, they innately or by virtue of DNA or however other means have special authority on all things race related, on all race conversations. What critical race theory does suggest, however, is that if you want to know about the Black experience in America or the African American experience in America, you should probably include African Americans' voices in the conversation. What it says is someone who is not Black cannot write the story of what it means to be Black in America. And so they may be able to get some of it. They may be able to get some pieces of it. They may be able to say some many true things. But if you really want to get a fuller definition of what it means to face racism in America from an African American point of view, then you should bring in the voices of African Americans. And by virtue, they do have a special kind of contribution to the conversation of racism in America from the Black perspective. Now, that doesn't make Black people, race authorities, the authority of all things race and all things racism. It makes them authorities about their own experiences that they lived through and saw and dealt with and have heard told to them over time as it's been passed from generation to generation. So already this idea or this point that he's trying to make, that I'm not trying to set myself up to have more authority because I'm Black, again, mismanages what critical race theory actually mentions there. Again, I think what happens is almost all of these ideas for critical race theory get blown up to be far bigger than what they are. I guess we'll see that over time.
I wanted to clarify that I am an American. My family.
Oh, one more thing. I want to make sure that we understand too, that I'm not sure that it's common, that the common experience that a Black person who goes back to Africa to live as a missionary for multiple years or just to visit is being assumed that they're going back to their homeland. I'm not sure who he is referring to who made that claim upon him, but it certainly isn't a common experience for Black people. And so, I hate that for him. I understand the frustration, but I don't think that that's the general idea that people think when Black people go to Africa for mission.
Has been in America for 6 or 7 generations. They came as slaves, but we've been in America for 6, 7 or more generations. And secondly, there are people who believed that perhaps I grew up outside of a typical Black environment, or that maybe I grew up with, some kind of privilege that made it impossible for me to understand these things from a proper perspective. And so those are the reasons that I wrote those sections, really just kind of to dispel those things. And but I was born and raised in South Central Los Angeles. I was raised by a single teenage Buddhist mother. I was born in 1969, and so I went to school during the era of desegregation and busing, and I was bused from my all-Black elementary school, Coliseum Street Elementary School, to in the jungle, right? For those of you who know LA, to Coliseum Street Elementary School, to Pacific Palisades Elementary School in the Pacific Palisades. And, so needless to say, I've had that whole experience, and I'm part of that generation. Also, my parents were very Afrocentric. I didn't grow up with my father, but I knew my father. He was incredibly Afrocentric. My family, because it wasn't a Christian family, my mother wasn't a Christian, it wasn't very much a sort of Martin Luther King family as much as it was an Angela Davis, Malcolm X, family. Okay. And so that was the brand.
I'll pause here for just a second, but yeah, so a lot of this is covered in the book of Fault Lines. And let me say, I recommend you buying the book Fault Lines if you haven't bought it. Again, I disagree with a lot of things he's saying in it, and I agree with a lot of things he's saying in it. Again, the book is a quality contribution to the conversation. And as we together experience ideas and interchange with each other, that I hope you will do with me, you're going to find that I'm going to present and even suggest reading both your point of view and others' points of view. As part of the community. I think we grow best when we learn from multiple points of view. And so there's lots that Voddie has to say that's legitimate and I would go wholeheartedly with, and there are some things that don't. So all these things he's mentioned right now, this part of his growing up is in the book. I do think it's worth it to note that his parents were the more Afrocentric, as he says it, sort, who would follow Angela Davis and Malcolm X. And those were some of the more extremist voices of the time. Angela Davis was legitimately pursuing a communist and socialist agenda that she would say herself. She would call herself a socialist, and so her herself was pursuing that, and some people from the 70s were sort of adopting that sort of idea, and so I could see where his sensitivity toward that language might come from his youth, and the same with Malcolm X, who made categorical statements about white people at certain points in his activism. He called all white people devils. And I could see where that might have played into maybe Voddie's sort of knee-jerk reaction, perhaps, to some of the responses of critical race theory. So those things to me are very interesting side notes for what he's saying.
Brand of Afrocentrism that resonated with me. And even as a new Christian, I used to wear T-shirts with Malcolm X on it, stuff like
Amazing.
that.
Amazing.
So that's kind of my background and my
Sean
perspective.
McDowell said, "Amazing, that's
when
crazy."
When I got old enough to run into a little trouble in South Central, my mother shipped me out, and I went and lived for a year and a half in Beaufort, South Carolina, with her oldest brother, who was a retired drill instructor in the Marine Corps.
Okay.
Yeah, changed my life. Yeah. The Marine Corps changed my life, and I didn't even have to be a Marine. But after that, we moved to San Antonio, and that's where I went to high school. That's where I started playing, sports, and got involved in all those sorts of things. And that's what really kind of in a general sense shaped me as a man. And then coming to faith that first year in college is really what transformed me as a man.
It sounds like you wrote that there was somebody with Campus Crusade or another ministry who was like, here's a Bible, let's study this, and just kind of mentored you, and it made sense.
Yeah, he did. He came to talk to me about starting a Bible study for the football team.
Hey, shout out to young adult ministry organizations around the country. Campus Crusade, of course, is one of the biggest ones in the varsity, and some of the other ones. Elevate, which is what I am working on building and doing. Another scenario where at the very formative time in a person's life, someone decided to speak directly to the young adult instead of waiting for them to come around. So Voddie Baucham is one of those people. I know there's many across the country, but I'm excited to hear that part of his story for sure. And that he came to faith at all. I think it's amazing. I think he'll get into his testimony here. Probably. We'll see.
And in about 5 minutes, you realize I didn't know Jesus from the man in the moon. And, went from there to sharing the 4 spiritual laws. I didn't really have enough understanding to even go with him on the 4 spiritual laws. So he just backed up and held up his Bible and said, Voddie, this is a Bible, And we spent 2.5, 3 weeks just talking about basic stuff, him answering my questions. Toward the end of that time, we were going to look for answers together. And so
that's cool.
I always say I was trained in apologetics before I was converted.
So you tell a story in your book of just growing up without a father in the home. Your cousin was shot, streets, gangs.
Two of my cousins were
two
killed
cousins.
Were shot to death. Yeah.
Wow. Coming to Christ in college, but you have this Afrocentric background. How did those two merge? What happened there?
Yeah, well, not too well in the beginning.
It's a good question.
In the beginning, I would have said that my blackness was more important than my Christianity, and then my Christianity had to be shaped by my blackness. That took priority for me. And I would say now that it's the exact opposite. That I understand that I'm called to be in Christ, and that Christ is Lord of all. Christ is Lord over all. Christ is greater than my ethnicity. Christ is greater than my nationality. Christ is greater than all of those things. And so all of those things must be subservient to who I am in Christ.
Beautiful. I agree 100% with that, man. Part of the problem that Christians are having with the race conversation is this sort of ethnocentricity. Now, for Voddie, he's speaking, of course, about his experiences growing up in an Afrocentric sort of household where the value of blackness was the immovable object, and around that, everything else needed to move and shift. And he's learned it throughout Christianity that, of course, Christ now and who in the love of Christ is the centerpiece, and we find our identity in it, and around it, everything in our lives move and shift. And that is exactly true and good. I think that conversation, so I'm 100% in on that. What I would like to see happen more is for that conversation to apply across ethnicities. Of course, when it comes to the race conversation, the accusation, and it's a legitimate accusation. The accusation is typically that Black people are centering their Blackness and bringing their, subjecting Christ to their Blackness, if you will. And there's many, many, many who do that. So I don't disagree with that at all. But the same is also true of quote unquote whiteness. And I think whiteness is harder to get our hands wrapped around because really we don't know what whiteness is. We know what Blackness is because it's kind of not whiteness, but what is whiteness? And so how does one put their whiteness in front of Christ? Well, in America, it looks like nationalism. It looks like America. And I think the same warning that's being applied to the dangers of ethnocentrism for Black people is also true of white people, or of white nationalists, or anyone who would put any group identity above Christ. And so I think it would be nice to hear the same energy pushed in both directions, especially given the days we live in, where white nationalism has been fused with Christianity, and certainly aspects of Christianity has bent to nationalism in unhealthy ways because of this ethnocentrism. So I know Voddie's talking about his own life experience here. Perhaps they'll get to it in this video, but it's not likely. Most of the time we'll talk about ethnocentrism. We're talking about people of color centering their color, their ethnic group, and not white people centering theirs.
I love that. For those of you just joining us, we're here with Voddie Baucham, author of Fault Lines, and we're talking not so much the nuts and bolts of critical race theory, social justice, but how should the church respond? Is this dividing the church? We're starting by hearing some of his story that he's been explaining. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit subscribe because we have some upcoming interviews, including my response to a popular atheist you're not going to want to miss. Now, once you became a believer, Voddie, you described...
Shout out to Sean with the reminder to like and subscribe. By the way, you guys should like and subscribe if you haven't done that already. Make sure you do that because I think you're going to enjoy the conversations that we have coming up. So get on that.
This experience in the Southern Baptist Convention. I'd love to just hear, and you're careful to say, you're not saying this is true for everybody's experience, but what was your experience like?
Well, I mean, which part are you talking about? Are you talking about my experience in terms of the politics of the SBC, or
no? Let's go back when you served at a church that was Southern Baptist early on. Not so much the politics that came later. Yeah. I'd love to hear that experience.
I didn't serve at Southern Baptist churches earlier. Earlier on, I served at National Baptist churches. Okay. I served at predominantly Black churches, National Baptist churches. Okay. And it wasn't until much later that I served at a Southern Baptist church. And in fact, the way that I became a Southern Baptist was, I transferred my senior year from Rice University. I was playing football at Rice on a football scholarship there. And, God calls me to preach. I didn't grow up in the church, so I don't have much of a background, and I knew I needed to train. So because I was a football player, people were inviting me to come speak at events because I was a football player, but I didn't know much of anything. And so I transferred to Houston Baptist University as a senior. And not only a senior, but I was married and we had a daughter. And now all of a sudden I go from, being on full scholarship, sign your name, to having to pay for school. But if you're a ministry student, tuition was half. if you are at a Southern Baptist church. So I had two questions. One, what's a Southern Baptist church?
Yeah, exactly.
And two, how do I find one?
For real though.
So that's how I became a Southern Baptist. But I asked for a Black Southern Baptist church.
That's hilarious.
And I talk about in the book how I said that and nobody blinked. Now, if a white student had come and said, I want a Southern Baptist church, but I want a white Southern Baptist church, he might have been disciplined.
Interesting.
But for me, I said, I want a Black Southern Baptist church. And they just went, yeah, here's a list. And so that's how I became a Southern Baptist.
Now, you described the way.
Okay, so once again, I mean, I don't want to I'm reacting to what he's saying. So the implication is that he's setting up that the Southern Baptist Convention is that there's a sort of Black, I'm going to say Black privilege, and he didn't say that. I'm saying that, of sort of Black privilege in that he's experienced, because he's able to go to the convention and say that he wanted to go to a Black church, and nobody would discipline him for that. Now, there's a whole slew of reasons why that might be, particularly because, of course, he is a Black person, and it's not unusual for the Southern Baptist Convention to certainly how it began, to want a segregated experience for people of color. Now, I'm not saying that that's the reason that he received no pushback for making that request, but I'm saying that that's not an unusual thing for the Southern Baptist Convention. And if we were to come back and hear that, that wouldn't be unusual. In other words, it doesn't exonerate them as being less racist or more racist. It is what it is. They just didn't say anything. We certainly can't outrightly contribute or attribute some sort of good meaning, what's the word I'm looking for? Goodwill towards him because they acquiesced his request to go to a Black church. It wouldn't be that much different than someone saying, hey, I want to go to a suburban area, or I want to go to an urban area, whether it's white or Black in a suburban Black area or urban white area, or young adults, or, an affluent area or an older population. I don't know that that really played in as much as he's trying to say there.
I'll ask you right here to talk about the way that you were treated, because it sounds, as I read your book, if I read it correctly, you feel like you were not treated differently because of your race, and that many people sought you out, mentored you, treated you fairly. Yeah. Did I read that right? Talk about your experience. Yeah.
No, I say I actually was treated differently, and I was treated differently because in the SBC there was a desire to have more Black churches, more Black involvement, more Black leadership. And because of that, there were a lot of people who took me under their wings. I showed promise, academically. And so they took me under their wings because a lot of Black students, I remember, when I graduated from seminary, I remember I got a survey from somebody who was doing a dissertation on Black ministers. And they asked me to fill out the survey. And their whole idea, the whole thing that they were researching was what made me stick to it and get an MDiv, because less than 15% of all Black ministers at that time had a theological education. And I remember just being floored by that. And so you take that small number of Black ministers with theological education, take the small number of Black people in the SBC, and then you take the fact that, a lot of guys who did get that theological education went, to serve the church and didn't serve the academy. So there were a lot of guys who were really trying to encourage me to at least consider a career in academia, and kind of going out of their way to keep me in the fold, so to speak, and to help me, down that road. There was also a sense in which a number of sort of movers and shakers in the Southern Baptist Convention, and I talk about this in the book, there hadn't been a Black president of the SBC. And they weren't interested in having a Black president in the SBC just because the person was Black. They wanted somebody who was really a Southern Baptist, who had credentials, who had, they didn't want a token. And so as I, sort of gained those credentials and worked within Southern Baptist life, there were a lot of the movers and shakers who began to sort of groom me with the idea of me possibly being the first Black president of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Oh, wow.
All right. So lots to comment on there. And I think we're at 30 minutes now. So I think we're going to wrap up with this section and then pick up in a video on the next one. But let's talk about a few things real quick. So first, he lays out that he felt that rather than being treated poorly, he was treated exceptionally for his Blackness, or certainly he was treated exceptionally, for his Blackness. As the way he's kind of telling the story is, he's sort of he's kind of again, I'm going to use my terms here, a sort of Tiger Woods of the theological arena, where he shows great acumen, he shows great promise, got this great potential, and because he's exceptional as a Black guy, as a Black man or a Black student of the gospel and theological, and he finished his MDiv, which he talked a lot about how a lot of Black preachers don't finish, and a lot of that has to do with finances and other sorts of things. I know, for instance, my dad is a pastor, and I don't believe he has his Master's of Divinity, but he has certainly mentored dozens of ministers who have their Masters of Divinity, and I believe that my father didn't finish it because it was a financial decision. We simply just could not afford to finish, and so there's lots of reasons for that. Voddie didn't say that there were good or bad reasons, but that data is out there. So all of a sudden now it feels like Black preachers don't have a good theological education, but he did. And so because of that, he's exceptional again. He's going to finish. He's got the MDiv. They see a spark in him. They want to coach him and train him and bring him up and bring him in. And he feels like his Blackness was contributive, was something that caused him to stand out, was additive, was something that, made a way for him rather than took away. So that's his story. That's very interesting to me. I'm not sure. He said they didn't want a token. I don't think that exceptional talent relieves the desire to be token or nullifies the tokenization. I think people still do need to be fairly qualified. There's a lot of Black people who are tokenized and qualified. I'm not saying that that's what they wanted to do with Voddie. I'm just saying we can't say that isn't what they wanted to do simply because he had his acumen. But he probably had some personal relationships and personal conversations that made him feel, and maybe it was true that they really believed that he would be a strong president of the Southern Baptist Convention if he pursued it. And so that says, I forgot what he said right here at the end. I wanted to say something about what he said at the end here, but I can't remember. But let's go a little bit longer. I think they got a little bit more to go in this section, and then we'll wrap up.
And then I came out as a Calvinist, and all that ended.
Oh, that's where it is. Okay, so Voddie Baucham's run toward Southern Baptist Convention president ended with Mr. Calvin and Calvinism. Yes, I wish I could have a conversation with Voddie about Calvinism as well, but that's another day, another dollar. I think there are some Baptists who are Calvinists, who are Reformed. I don't know. Maybe it wasn't then. Anyway, we'll stop right there. I hope you guys are enjoying the interview. Man, we want to. I'm gonna do some more and kind of try to get through the rest of these. Hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Jump in the chat. I want you guys to respond to Voddie, respond to Sean, respond to anything that I might say, and talk respectably to each other. We want to build a community where we can talk, disagree, disciple, all together. Everybody's on a different place in their journey. That means that we're going to see things differently. Disagreements are inevitable. we can disagree and not be disagreeable. And so that's what's up. Like and subscribe if you'd like to build a community like that, be a part of a community like that. It won't be a lot of us. So if you are someone that comes in and trolling, I'll be kicking you out. Okay. All right. That's it, man. We're going to go on to the next one. God loves you, and so do I. My name is Antoine Malone. Thanks for listening in, and I will see you next time.